Jane, guess what?
What?
We got a new sponsor.
Really? Who?
Audible. The sponsor you always wanted.
We're sponsored by Audible.
Yeah.
We're sponsored by Audible.
This is not a joke anymore. We're sponsored by Audible.
What am I going to joke about now?
I don't know.
That's my one running joke.
Your kittens?
What?
You're going to joke about your kittens?
What kittens?
I don't know.
I only have
Joke about something else.
I need to find a new running joke, everyone.
Yeah.
Use the hashtag on Instagram, hashtag Jane's running joke, to tell me what you think my new running joke should be. I'm a social media influencer now, so.
Or you should just drop the running jokes. Just go away.
It's now
No, actually, we're sponsored by Audible. Yeah, you heard that right. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Shakespeare. Over 180 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. For you, our dear listeners of the How to Get Away with Shakespeare podcast, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I personally recommend looking into the Archangel Shakespeare collection. They have great audiobooks for all your favorite Shakespeare plays. King Lear, Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Othello, The Merchant of Venice, etc. Pretty much every Shakespeare play is on there. I absolutely love Audible because I can hear the different character voices in my head while I'm reading. It is like watching a stage production, and Shakespeare is ultimately meant to be performed, not read, so Audible is always my go-to for that. Plus, if your eyes get tired from reading, you can just listen instead, and it's awesome. And the quality of Audible is incredible. So, Jane, any audiobook that you recommend? Have you tried Archangel Shakespeare?
I haven't actually tried Archangel Shakespeare yet, so thank you for the recommendation. I'll do that.
Yeah.
I listen to Audible a lot. Like, I got one of those milestones where they tell you you've listened to like 200 hours or something.
Oh my god.
But my favorite audiobook is probably What Belongs to You by Garth Greenwell. It's beautifully read, and it's just a fascinating book as well. It's narrated by Peter Marek, and it's just like hours of this beautiful story. If you really like stories that don't have as much plot, which is sort of in contrast to Shakespeare, then you'll really enjoy it. It's all about, I mean, it has plot, but it's all about the character and the language. It's really wonderful. If you're a lover of language, then you'll love that.
And I also recommend Audible because I wouldn't recommend a product that I don't believe in. I wouldn't accept a sponsor that I don't believe in, actually. So Audible is great because I've been using it for so long, and I love it. I absolutely love it. At university, it's my go-to because we have so much reading to do, and sometimes my eyes are just tired, so I go to Audible. You can also listen to a book while cooking or walking your dog. I love listening to Audible while walking my dog because I can just listen to a book and then get the energy out of me and my dog at the same time. It's great.
Yeah, I actually love to listen like while I'm knitting or crocheting because I find like I have a lot of nervous energy and I can get it out, but I can also like be really focused mentally on a book, which is really good for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, you can do two things at the same time, and you're learning while you knit, which is awesome.
For sure. I mean, the other thing is I always find I have really interesting dreams after I listen to an audiobook. I don't know if this is just me, but like I have these crazy dreams. Like they have plots of themselves.
Oh.
Yeah, I have dreams.
Wow.
Like, you know, when people talk about crazy like fever dreams, I have like 8 fever dreams at once. Like if
Do you feel like you remember the story more while listening to an audiobook? Because I do, actually.
Yeah, I think I'm a very like auditory person. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's good for remembering stuff for sure.
Yeah, I agree. When I listen to an audiobook, I remember more than when I actually read it. I don't know why. Maybe I lose interest when I'm just reading the page.
It's like one of those things, like they tell you to eat gum while you're studying, and then if you're in an exam to also chew the same gum because it triggers it. Like I find like I can recall how the person said a word, like
and
these violent delights, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and with the different voices too.
Yeah,
I'm like,
it's
I
great.
remember that. You said it like that. And it's great. So yeah. To download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Shakespeare. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Shakespeare. Yes, we got Shakespeare. So thank you very much to Audible for sponsoring this podcast. We absolutely love you for that. All right, let's get this party started. Welcome to How to Get Away with Shakespeare. You're listening to How to Get Away with Shakespeare with Jane Fox and Gabriel Vega. Starting now.
You want to introduce yourself?
Oi there, it's me, William Shakespeare.
Yeah, we got William Shakespeare in the house today.
Just having a look at what's going on in the 21st century.
How do you feel? 400 years old.
Everyone's ripping me off. It's not fun.
That's funny.
Yes,
How do you feel about our podcast, How to Get Away with Shakespeare?
You're doing good work here. If more people knew about just who's ripping me off on a daily basis, maybe I'd get some of that money.
How would you get it? Your work is in the public domain.
Listen, that's the one thing I'd work on is I heard Disney's doing some good things, getting their work to stay in the public domain for a little bit, and I'd like some of that money now, please. Give me the money.
Okay.
Wow. Who knew Shakespeare would be such a money grubber?
Thanks.
Well, Shakespeare, I don't want to take too much of your time. I know that you have to go write plays. Please keep writing them. We'd love to have you on again. If you want to be on a podcast again, I don't know. But please come back.
Right. Cheerio.
Bye, Shakespeare.
Watching your lips move like, cheerio. See you later.
So, yeah, that was Shakespeare. He's gone now. Yeah, so this week is episode 4 of How to Get Away with Shakespeare. Today, what are we talking about, Jane?
We're talking about season 1 of Westworld.
Westworld.
Which is a great show, by the way.
Yeah, she didn't want to watch it at first.
I didn't want to watch it because I have this weird thing against shows if James watches them without me, my partner. I will not watch them, and I developed this hatred of them, like this grudge. But then I watched it, and I was like, I should have watched this a year ago. But now I don't have to wait as long for season 2, which is coming out April 22nd. So I'm excited.
And yeah, so I'm excited for that too.
I'm more excited, but you know.
No, but yeah, sure. I'm very excited because, yeah, it's Jonathan Nolan, and I'm a big Jonathan Nolan fan.
But spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about season 1 today, so if you have not finished it...
You don't care that I'm a big Jonathan Nolan fan?
Why would I?
Okay. Well, let's
Why are you a
move
big
on.
Jonathan Nolan fan? Let's look into this further.
Well, who wouldn't be? He wrote The Dark Knight.
Really?
Yeah, with his brother, Christopher Nolan.
Oh, they're brothers. Interesting.
It's Christopher
We're
Nolan's
learning
brother.
a backstory here.
And Lisa Joy is his wife. And Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy are running Westworld.
Someone's been watching the after credits.
No, I'm just in the film business, and I love writers.
I'm also in the film business.
Well, no.
Catch me on next episode of a show. I couldn't think of a good enough show.
Okay, that's great. So, so you liked Westworld?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it definitely, like, I love a show that within the first episode will make a reference and admit that it's making a reference, because then, like, people might just say, oh yeah, well, okay, they're quoting Shakespeare, so big deal. But then if you look at it further, actually more shows up than just, like, the little quotes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's also, as I was watching, I was like, oh my god, Jane's gonna hate this.
Why?
Because in terms of Shakespeare, I was like, where is Shakespeare? And then the last 5 minutes of the show, or I mean the first episode, I think when Peter Abernethy, am I saying that right?
Abernethy, yeah.
Abernethy, and he quotes like 5 lines of Shakespeare. I was like, oh, okay, there's Shakespeare. But then when you go back, you're like, oh, it's not only quotes, it's also story-wise, picking up from different plays, picking up from different structures of plays or characters, and what we'll talk about today. So, for quotes, the show doesn't exactly hide that it uses Shakespeare, because clearly Ford says, oh, this is from Shakespeare. Peter Abernethy was quoting Shakespeare. Or, oh, I'm quoting Shakespeare right now. But in terms of characters and story-wise, there are some Shakespeare moments that are not, that Ford or any other character don't say, oh, that's from Shakespeare. Oh, you're Prospero, actually. No, but there are some characters and stories from Shakespeare integrated in there. And while we're going to talk about what we call How Not to Get Away with Shakespeare, the podcast is called How to Get Away with Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about the moment that are Shakespeare mostly. And
the parts that don't really that aren't as obvious, maybe.
Yeah, we're going to talk about what isn't explicit, what isn't called out. And yeah, there are also a lot of quotes that are not called out. Structures, moments from plays, characters, roles, themes, yeah, etc. Okay, so
let's get this show on the road. Let's get this party started.
Kilero numero uno. That's from HQ again. Just play it. We're not sponsored by HQ.
I wish we were for us.
Okay, what struck you as Shakespeare the first few hours that you watched?
I mean, the first 2 hours?
First few.
The first few, definitely all the quotes, but then also a lot of the stuff surrounding, like, what makes someone human? You know, is it their memory? Is it their ability to identify themselves? Is their ability to recognize themselves as different from others?
Right.
That struck me as something that Shakespeare really explores a lot in his plays. Okay.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit more? Because I thought about that, and I was like, what Shakespeare plays deal with Are We Human? And I was like, oh, maybe all of them. But
I think for sure all of them.
But is there a specific play that you saw that? Or is there a play in particular that you thought, oh, this is Westworld looking at humans?
You know, I think it's really all of them, because I think it's the way that Shakespeare characterizes the people he's using in the plays. I think it's the way he differentiates them from others. You can see the work that went into sort of writing each character, and this is something that's explored in Macbeth, in Hamlet, even in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yeah. I saw a lot of quotes, to be honest, but
for sure.
I had a hard time figuring out which story of which plays they were using while watching the series. One thing I saw, though, was The Tempest.
And I think that makes sense that it wouldn't be just one, because as they say, you know, there are 50 different plot lines going on, you know.
Yeah.
Each different story going on is different, a part of a different Shakespeare story, perhaps.
Right.
Which makes sense.
But for The Tempest, I saw Ford as a Prospero figure.
Yeah, I agree.
Because he says that he's a magician at some point. Everything in this world is magic except the magician. And he's the magician. He even talks about with Bernard. He said, "We practice witchcraft. We speak the right words. Then we create life itself out of chaos." And so it's like very Prospero-like, and the relationship with Bernard is even more, even reinforces more is Prospero link, because with Bernard, he treats him like an Ariel almost, like a slave. Yeah,
for sure.
Who needs to be released, or a slave that like obeys his master every.
And it's interesting because at the end he does eventually sort of set all of his slaves free.
Yeah.
Just like Ariel gets set free at the end.
So yeah, Ford Prospero, definitely.
And you can also see his tablet, sort of the thing he uses to control all of them, as like his magic book.
Yeah, and he controls the story too, just like Prospero in The Tempest, because in The Tempest there's the story of Ferdinand and Miranda, and they don't know that they're supposed to fall in love, and Prospero arranges everything, but they just think, I just met you, you're cute, let's fall in love. No, it's actually Prospero that created the shipwreck. It's actually Prospero that brought the Ferdinand to the island and made him fall in love, so he can fall in love with Miranda.
Right, just like in the show where the plot line is scripted, so they do the same thing every day, and they're allowed that small amount of improvisation. Just like in the music at the beginning of the show, actually, where there's like that elegant piano sort of theme, and then at the very end there's sort of that like little bit jazzy, like improvisational part, which definitely sort of seemed like an echo of that, sort of like the stories where they're improvising just a little bit, but they have to stick to the main script.
Right. And also, like, in terms of the story, when you're controlling something, it's like, yes, he's a magician, yes, he's a witch, but he's also a god. And he thinks of himself as a god, or some people call him a god. Even Maeve, when she wakes up, she's like, "Oh, at first I thought you guys were gods, but you're just men." And yeah, because they create like all the oaths, they have this godlike thing going on. But yeah,
and that almost seems like something Caliban would say. Like, I thought you were gods, but you're really just men. Like,
absolutely.
This island was mine.
Yeah.
This storyline was mine, and then
even Dolores.
You took over.
And even
Dolores, for sure. I would say she is definitely a Caliban figure.
She says, "You don't belong in this world." And that's very Caliban-like.
I will people this world with tiny Calibans.
Yeah. No, I didn't get that on my first watch, because it's the second time I watched the show, and there's so many things I missed. And now that I knew that William was the Black Ad, that Bernard was Arnold, and that Dolores was Wyatt, and every little secret, I could follow like the story along and see all the foreshadowings to that. And it was so much better to watch it a second time, knowing all that, because you could actually understand everything, and there's so much depth that you miss on the first watch that I got this time. And I was like, the first time I watched the finale, I was like, what the hell is going on? Chaos. Why chaos? And yeah, this time I understood everything. It was great.
Indeed.
It was your first time watching it. Did you understand everything, or were you confused?
I think because I was like, this is Shakespeare at the beginning. Like, I feel like if I was just watching it really casually, I wouldn't maybe have noticed. Like, I would have been like, okay, there's some Gertrude Stein, like, with the a rose is a rose is a rose, it is what it is. But
there are so many literary references in this show that it's so rich in it. It's so great, because you feel great to have learned all these things. It makes the experience so much better too, I feel. Yeah.
It does. I mean, I just went crazy when he listed like 5 Shakespeare quotes in a row, because like, for example, like, I love Henry IV. So when it was like, by most mechanical and dirty hand, I was like, wait a second. Like, now I'm excited.
Should we list all these quotes? So, do you want to do it? Peter Abernethy lists like 5 quotes in a row, 5 Shakespeare quotes. So, we start with King Lear quote, which is,
"When we are born, we cry that we are come to this great stage of fools."
and then he goes, "by most mechanical and dirty hand." And then there's a famous quote from Westworld that you thought was from Westworld, but is actually from Shakespeare. "These violent delights have violent ends."
Which is the greatest line in Romeo and Juliet, if I can say so.
Yeah.
And then we have...
Your thesis is actually...
My thesis project is titled Violent Delights, because I couldn't fit the whole quote in, but I feel like that's sort of... I mean, my thesis is about dismemberment, and I feel like Violent Delights is the perfect description of what dismemberment is on stage.
Yeah. And you weren't sure, like, when I told you should watch Westworld for Shakespeare, you were like, is this the quote that they use every time for everything? All the time?
I thought they were just going to use the one quote, so I was like, I don't want to watch if it's just going to be, them saying the same quote over and over again that the friar says to Romeo, but...
It's not that kind of show, though.
No, it's not. It's a very good show. I cannot say enough that I really enjoyed it.
Do you like Bloodline or Westworld better?
Oh, Westworld. 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
For the women, especially.
What do you mean?
Compared to Bloodline. Last week we had an issue with the women in Bloodline.
Yeah. Bloodline, there was like one woman who was
Meg
active.
Yeah.
And the rest were like in the background, and even Meg like didn't get to do very much. So
this is not the case with Westworld.
Is definitely. And the thing about Westworld is that it's a story within a story, right? So it's very meta theatrical. So Dolores will actually say things like, I want to control my own story, I don't want to be a damsel in distress anymore. And then what's her name, Maeve, yes, exactly. She will actually say things like, I'm writing my own story from now on. And then she does, which I think is very Shakespearean.
Even the other prostitutes, or the lady with the snakes, tattooed snakes, they're all so strong. And they're also badass. And they're also, like, they're not just strong. They show their weak side. They show their strong side. Exactly. They show everything.
It's not a strong, independent female trademark. It's like, it's really
a woman.
Real women.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think there's something to be said for the woman with the snake tattoos, because she's literally written her own story in ink.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, how much more, meta can you get?
Has she written her own story, though, or has Ford written their own story?
I mean, that's what we can ask, right? But I feel like that part of it where you're thinking, oh, she's great, and then you think, but she was written by him, but then there's that added element where it's like, but what are we reducing them to? I mean, that's what humans are too. You can say that we are only nature, not nurture.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that argument comes in, that what is the difference?
I guess compared to Shakespeare, the women in Shakespeare are, when they get away from men, they're more independent in Shakespeare. I feel when there's a man around, they're like, or either the wife or either the servant or whatever it is, and like Ophelia goes into madness and she's away from men, and now she's independent and she has agency. We could argue she's more independent when she's away, and that's true for Marina in Pericles. She's away from her father, and the fathers in Shakespeare, we know they're possessive and
troublesome men,
and they like to own their daughters and decide for them and control their fate, who they're gonna love, who they're gonna whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, King Lear essentially says, like, you should love me more than your husband, and then Cordelia is like, shouldn't I love my husband more? Isn't this a problem that you're raising as a father? And I feel like all the fathers in Shakespeare are like that, but Shakespeare's finally combating it with Cordelia and King Lear.
To be fair, though, Dolores as a problem with her father the first few episodes. I feel like he's very Shakespearean, the Shakespearean father, because he's like, I think at one point Dolores is like, my father is not gonna like you coming home with me to Teddy. She says that, and I was like, oh, that's very Shakespearean. Her father is possessive, or doesn't likes to choose who she's gonna be with.
It's true, and I think it's mentioned that he used to be a soldier, so he has that sort of like, not exactly royalty, but like very military-esque atmosphere about him. Like, and he tells her, make sure you're home before dark, that kind of thing. Like,
but I guess she gets away from home, and then she's more independent.
But it's only after her family dies, right? So, question mark.
Yeah.
Question mark.
But I guess she always had the aggressiveness or the aggressive side in her, because she's also Wyatt. She's both Wyatt and Dolores, because when she was conceived, they were already developing Wyatt, and they put Wyatt, the character that they had, into Dolores, so she's both character, so she's already kind of strong.
And I think there's an interesting point there too, because of course all of the women in Shakespeare's time would be played by men.
Yeah.
So all of the women would be inherently men and women at the same time in performance. So she's essentially performing both roles.
Yeah.
She's getting all her lines written for her by either Ford or Arnold or Lee, the scriptwriter, the head of scriptwriting. So she's always sort of, in one way, echoing a man's words through her mouth, which is sort of the opposite of what actors at the time would be doing. They would be saying a woman's words through a male sort of mouth.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
What I say is always interesting, so you're welcome.
Okay. One other quote that I really found interesting was, "Hell is empty and all the devils are here."
From The Tempest.
And what do you make of that quote? Because that's very Westworldy, because the devils are the devils, the host programmers, or the Ford, or the board.
That one for me was another one that sort of underscored the sort of the meta type of text, I guess, that, in The Tempest, it's Ariel telling Prospero that's what Ferdinand said, and in the show it's a quote. There's like a different layers, because it's a quote.
It's
from
also
Shakespeare,
from Peter Abernethy.
but it's from Peter, but it's actually from whoever wrote it, so probably Ford or Lee.
Right.
But it's a quote from Shakespeare. So there's like those multiple levels of reference and allusion, which I think is interesting.
But what did he mean by that, do you think? Because it clearly has a significance to the show. And as I was watching the show, I was like, yeah, that's right. All the devils are here. And I was thinking of the board. I was thinking of Ford, all the humans.
I was thinking of, the newcomers who just come and treat the hosts like they're dolls.
Yeah, they're basically slaves or objects just to fill their needs, and they exploit them. And and they're the devils.
And I think it's interesting because it sort of brings the idea too of water imagery into the show, because that quote is from the scene where Ariel and the other, I guess, spirits, maybe just Ariel, but he's using his powers to control the sea and to, essentially shipwreck these men.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of water imagery in Waterworld.
With Kevin Costner. Catch it.
Don't know. In Westworld,
not the same movie.
Like, a lot of the time we see Dolores painting these pictures of water and land, and I think maybe the water is something like the rift between the world of the hosts, Westworld, and the real world. I don't know, but I felt like there was a weird gap between the two.
What do you mean by gap?
I guess it's in the way that the show functions, where we either see people in Westworld or in, the hub sort of space. Like, we never see people in transport between the two, if you know what I mean.
Right.
I think there's the one scene of the train, but even that,
But we don't see the real world also.
Yeah, the other thing is, where we don't even know, are they on an island because they refer to the mainland? Like, are we off on like a
And that's
floating
interesting.
cloud.
Like the island
Who knows? Yeah.
imagery. It's
Exactly,
very The
it's water.
Tempest.
That's why I said yeah.
Yeah. That's very good. Yeah. It also feels with exploitation and also feels like kind of The Tempest because of colonialism and the way Caliban is treated in The Tempest. I think we talked about this earlier, but he says it's my world. But yeah, they explored those people, and because it's an amusement park and they do whatever they want. But the idea is still interesting. Who wouldn't want to go there, actually?
That's the thing, like, watching it, I was like, wow, this is, like, I feel like that's, like, the ideal immersive game. Like, I want to go there. But then you realize, like...
It's like Disney World for adults, basically.
I've never been to Disney World.
Really? Why? How?
My family was not a Disney family. They were more, library family.
Is there a library park?
Well, there's
Have you been to
libraries.
Universal with the Harry Potter?
No, I haven't.
Oh my
It's one of
god,
the
you're
great
missing out.
regrets of my life.
Oh god, we should do the podcast from there one day.
Okay, let's get Universal to sponsor us to travel and do our podcast on Harry Potter in Shakespeare from there. Shakespeare and Harry Potter, not Harry Potter and Shakespeare.
Actually, let us know if you want us to do a Harry Potter episode. How to get away with Shakespeare at gmail.com. I'd really like to do that. I think Jane would love it because she loves Harry Potter. Speaking of old movies, we mentioned Waterworld. Did you know that Westworld was actually a movie before a TV show?
Like 1973, right?
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see the Shakespeare in that too. If it was something from the show or it was something from the original movie that took from Shakespeare. Or, I don't know, maybe Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy are just big Shakespeare fans and they just took that. I know the movie, from what they said, it's really different. I've not seen it. I know nothing about it. I wanted to watch it, but I didn't have time for this podcast because there were 10 episodes of this show, and they're all like an hour and 10 minutes long or something. The last episode is like an hour and a half. So, yeah. Maybe I'll watch it for next week, and I can tell you...
we can talk about it at the beginning of next
Yeah, we
week's
can talk
episode.
about it. Not for long, but we can talk about it. And maybe do an episode if it's really Shakespeare. Yeah. Yeah, so hell is empty and all the devils are here. That's really interesting.
And I think that's interesting, too, because... I mean, it does bring in the idea of the newcomers to the island, and especially the fact that Ariel is reporting it. I mean, he obviously doesn't think that he is a devil.
Yeah. We can talk about some other quotes that are explicit from Shakespeare. These violent delights have violent ends. So what do you think is the meaning of that in the show versus the meaning of Romeo and Juliet?
You know, I think that's another great one to talk about the green world, because that quote is said sort of in this green world in the Friar's Apothecary in Romeo and Juliet, and it's sort of a foreshadowing of the ending that they're going to have.
Right.
But he's also warning them that...
Which is true of Westworld, too. Right.
He's sort of warning them that... I think the line is, like, fire and powder, and he's talking about, an explosive, which also sort of relates to Westworld. If they meet too quickly, their kiss consumes them, and they, obviously blow up. And it sort of relates because it's the same sort of thing happening in Westworld.
But why that line? Why choose that line of all of it?
Because it's an explosive line, and the minute he says it to her, it's like it changes something in her. It's like a line of code.
Peter says it to Dolores.
Yes.
And then
Dolores she says it to Maeve.
To Maeve. And then Maeve says it to whoever.
Does she say it to
no,
someone?
she
I don't
doesn't
think so.
say. Anyway, it's a code. It's used as a code, and whoever planted that in their heads, it's like, it's transforming them, because when they hear that line, I think Dolores says it to Teddy too, and he becomes conscious near the end too of his memories, and he remembers his experience with Wyatt, and Wyatt made him kill all these people, which Wyatt is Dolores, obviously,
Right.
but she was Wyatt in that moment. But I think she says it to Teddy. I could be wrong.
That sounds right, but I'm not sure. But it's definitely a line that causes something to trigger in someone's head.
Right.
Not so much in Romeo and Juliet, because it does not cause anything to happen for them. But
it ultimately foreshadows the end.
yes, absolutely. It showed. I think he says traveling too quickly, in addition to traveling too slowly, will also make you not on time, which is interesting.
Yeah. And the lights are part of the show because people come to the amusement part to be delighted and
To have violent
to be
delight.
entertained. So violent delights and to torture these poor hosts. They were made for that. Too bad.
But in that way, we can also think about it a little bit as a commentary on all forms of entertainment. Theater, TV. I mean, we're watching it and it's going to be a good episode if
Right.
something really dramatic is happening. Like, Dolores is getting dragged off by the man in black. That kind of thing. Like, I mean, we all kind of like violent delight. Some much more.
Well, and
Immersive than others.
that moment is also foreshadowing the end, because in the first episode, Dolores is dragged, but in the final episode, Dolores drags the Men in Black, and she has a revenge on her, and it's also violent delight for him to drag her, but violent delights of violent ends, and she turns on him, and she goes all freaking Wyatt on him, and yeah, she's just badass in that moment. Yeah.
That scene was really satisfying. To me, anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of Romeo and Juliet, that's a good transition to speak about all these Romeo and Juliet moments. There's a very Romeo and Juliet reference in this. Men in Black, I think it's in the 9th or the 8th episode, talks about his wife. And he says that his wife was named Juliet. Is that Logan's sister? I don't know. But his wife is Juliet. And he says that his wife killed herself for him because it was terrible. But still, rings any bell yet? She killed herself because of him or for him in Romeo and Juliet. So is there some Romeo and Juliet romance with the black hat and his wife, or is it a contrast to that?
I mean, that's the question. I'm not sure we know. I think it's definitely there to get us thinking about Romeo and Juliet again. I just don't know. I mean, what do you think? Who is who?
Well, I don't think it's a Romeo and Juliet moment. I just think it's quite the opposite. I felt like how Romeo thinks of Rosaline. Is that her name?
Rosaline, yeah.
Yeah. In that moment, he's like, "Oh, no." I'm like, I preferred Dolores in the park. I prefer Juliet. That's
actually really similar.
Yeah.
Because the thing about, and we talked about this in one of our other episodes, the thing about Romeo's love of Rosaline is that it's really his love of himself. He barely talks about her. He's always saying how he feels, so.
And that's the same
loving
with
of her.
William.
Exactly. It's more about him and, his role in the company. We don't ever hear him say a single thing about anything about her. Like, why does he like her? I kept wondering, why are they together?
Only Logan mentions her, and he's like, think of my sister. Remember my sister, the girl you left back home.
Which is weird because he was the one who dragged him out there in the first place and kept trying to encourage him to, get with all these prostitutes and everything. But
yeah. Anyway, I think also Logan didn't know to what extent, because he says in the end, he says to William, he says, "Oh, I told you would find your true self in this park, and you found it." But he wasn't expecting that. And he said, "Oh, you're all this pretentious men, William, and you act like it's all a performance back home, but you're really messed up." And yeah.
You know, it's also interesting that the picture of Juliet that we see is the one that Abernethy is looking at.
Right.
And then he says the line from Romeo and Juliet. So it's what makes him think of it, looking at the picture of Juliet, even though he had no idea.
If it's Juliet.
It is Juliet. It's the same picture. We see it later on.
No, but I mean, yeah, but it's not confirmed that Juliet is Logan's sister, because the Black Hat doesn't say that. It just says my wife was named Juliet, and then later we learn that William is the Black Hat.
True.
So if it's Juliet, which I think it is, it's the same. It would be a great connection for Peter Abernethy to look at Juliet, and yeah, it's very Romeo and Juliet like. But then, if we think of Romeo and Juliet here, is I have my hand ready to. I love this. But if we think of a Romeo and Juliet, are Teddy and Dolores a Romeo and Juliet? Are William and Dolores a Romeo and Juliet? What is going on here? Or is Maeve and the Spanish guy a Romeo and Juliet?
You know, it's also interesting with Maeve because there is actually a line. So I was talking about when Romeo is still thinking about Rosaline, and one of his friends actually says to him and trying to encourage him, there's this like random speech in the middle, and one of his friends goes on and on about Queen Maeve of the fairies. I was rereading that this morning, and it's this crazy thing, like she plucks acorns and she does all this stuff with her fairies, and then everyone's sort of like, what the hell are you talking about, guy? But it's really strange because, I mean, the Queen of the Fairies would obviously have control over people, like we see in Midsummer Night's Dream. And Maeve definitely has control over others, like the hosts, you know, she gives voice commands, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But for me, who's Romeo and Juliet the most? I think it's William and Dolores. Because one is part of one world and the other is part of the other.
It's true.
And Romeo and Juliet are kind of from two different worlds, two different families, but they still love each other, and they forget about their two different worlds, like William and Dolores, and they just love each other until William turns evil.
Yeah, what the hell, William?
Yeah, but for that part, when Dolores and William are in love, or they appear to be, well, it's very Romeo and Juliet for me.
I agree, even though in the beginning it seems like Teddy and Dolores sort of have that Romeo and Juliet style, because he is also from a sort of different world,
he was made to love her too, so it feels like Teddy's also Rosaline, because Romeo is supposed to love Rosaline, right? So
exactly, and they're sort of trapped in that contained narrative, and then it starts getting broken up by Dolores' actions.
Yeah. So yeah, who's Romeo and Juliet? I don't know.
I want to think it would be William and Dolores, because they do sort of have that love at first sight type of thing too.
Right.
He sees her out the window and he's like, I need to go pick up that woman's condensed milk.
But they're also, Teddy and Dolores, they're also lovers that can be with each other. Because Teddy says, if I could, I would stay, but I can't.
And he also says, you know, your father better not cash me back at your house.
Yeah, the problem with fathers again. Yeah. But yeah, okay, Teddy and Dolores, or we have Dolores and William / the Black Hat. Yeah, so write us an email. I want to know, who do you think is Romeo and Juliet? Because there's a lot in there to play with.
I cannot wait until next season. On April 22nd, I'm really hoping there'll be more Shakespeare quotes, especially from Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, for sure.
Because I think the darker side of Romeo and Juliet isn't often explored. It's always like the star-crossed lovers. Of course, star-crossed means, you know, fated. Usually something bad by the stars. The stars means something bad is going to happen to you.
By the way, it's Lisa Joy that said that Shakespeare would be an amazing showrunner, and Lisa Joy runs Westworld. So she takes a lot from from Shakespeare. She clearly said in an interview, I don't know where it is, I think you can find it on YouTube, but she said, we take a lot from Shakespeare, and we're big fans of Shakespeare. He would be an amazing showrunner, and it's clearly there. They're clearly explicit about that. They're not, oh, we're just getting away with Shakespeare, and nobody's gonna catch us. So guys, this is the end of this podcast because we decided to do a two-parter because we had too much content.
Just too much to talk about with Westworld, which is a mark of how great it is.
And we didn't want you to listen to a 2-hour podcast. So we cut it into 2 episodes.
Catch us in the next episode. Definitely listen to that one if you liked this one because we're going to go into all the issues, but more in depth. So if you think we didn't touch on something enough, check the next one out because, there'll be more.
So the next podcast comes out April 6th. That's a Friday. So yeah, wait for Westworld Season 1, Part 2. Again, you can follow us on Twitter at VegaGabe. And
Jane the Fox.
And our new address.
HTGAWS_podcast. How to Get Away with Shakespeare podcast.
So that's the official Twitter of the podcast. We also have an Instagram account that it's How to Get Away with Shakespeare, I think, the end all. And then we have also a Facebook official. Please, if we're not asking too much, please review, rate, and subscribe on iTunes. We'd like to know how we're doing on iTunes. It's important.
And maybe we'll shout you out next time or something.
Yeah.
I'll read your voice in my ASMR voice. Thank you very much. 8_ James 22. I'm just making up a name.
So you can always write us at howtogetawaywithshakespeare@gmail.com. That doesn't change. We say it enough. All right. Thank you, and see you on Part 2.
And apologies for not arguing as much this time. We sort of agreed on everything, didn't we? Would you like to hear more arguments? Because we're good at arguing. We can bring in guests who will argue with.
She likes arguing.
I love arguing.
It's her specialty.
Well, I did consider becoming a lawyer so I could argue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day,
Cheerio.
Great night, great morning, whatever.
Cheerio.
Great drive to work. Cheerio. And again, thank you to Audible for sponsoring this podcast. See you again next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye. If you liked this podcast and want more, go on iTunes and search for How to Get Away with Shakespeare. We're also on SoundCloud, Spreaker.com, and YouTube. Again, thank you very much for listening.